The Kethverdua were already on deck 4 when I sent the first plea. I want to be precise about this, because precision is what we are, what the Vorathale have always been. We are a species that catalogues. We name things correctly. We do not reach for metaphor when a measurement will serve. So let me say it plainly. The boarding clamps attached to Elon Voss at 0314 station time. By 0317, the outer airlock on deck 4 had been opened from outside with a Kethverdua spoofing relay. By 0319, I had transmitted our distress code on 7 channels to the 7 allied factions whose patrol routes came within 4 light hours of our station. By 0322, I had received no reply from any of them. I am a thought keeper. It is my function to record, to remember, and, when required, to assess. I have held this post for 31 years. I have never once needed to assess a boarding action, because the Vorathale do not have boarding actions. We have trade agreements and treaty councils and relay disputes that take 18 months to resolve through proper channels. We have no soldiers. We have not had soldiers in 400 years, because soldiers are a solution to a problem that intelligence is supposed to prevent. I was watching the monitors on deck 4 when the first of our maintenance staff, a young light pattern technician named Orvale, 22 years old, brilliant, working late on the relay array, encountered the Kethverdua advance unit. He had the presence of mind to run. He was faster than I expected. He made it 3 corridors before they caught him. I sent the plea a second time. 6 channels. The 7th was already degraded. The Kethverdua had found the relay antenna on the outer hull. By 0341, I had heard from 3 of the 7 factions. The Veth Conclave expressed formal regret and noted that their nearest vessel was 11 hours distant. The Aerith Collective sent an automated acknowledgement, which is what their system does when a plea arrives outside operational hours. The Durath Cooperative said nothing for 14 minutes and then responded with a single line. *dispatching assessment team. *and assessment team. We were being boarded by 80 Kethverdua shock troops, and the Durath were dispatching someone to assess the situation. The remaining 4 factions were silent. I sat in the observation tier, the great crystalline dome at the station's crown, where the Vorathale come to think and to look outward at the dark, and I watched the monitors. Below me, deck by deck, the station was being taken. They were not killing indiscriminately. The Kethverdua are not stupid. They wanted the relay infrastructure intact, and they wanted the Thought Keepers alive, because what we know is worth considerably more than what we own. They were being selective, methodical. They had done this before. I had sent 17 pleas by then. 17, on every functional channel remaining. And I had received nothing that would help us. I want to explain something about the Vorathale and the humans, because it is relevant to what I am trying to record honestly. We had encountered humanity approximately 40 years prior. We had assessed them. Our assessment was thorough, because we are thorough, and it concluded the following. Humanity is a young, physically capable species with significant military development relative to their technological age, limited diplomatic integration into galactic structures, and a tendency toward what our analysts called *disproportionate response*, meaning they consistently deployed more force than a situation seemed to require. We had classified them as a Category 3 contact, notable, worth monitoring, not yet a factor in regional affairs. What I had not understood, and I was one of the analysts who contributed to that assessment, was that *disproportionate response* was not a liability. It was the entire point. At 0347, a signal came in on a frequency we had not used in the outgoing pleas. A non-standard band, the kind of channel that human cargo vessels use for informal relay-to-relay communication. The message was short. Elon Voss, this is the frigate Carrow's Run. We caught your ghost bleed on the secondary band. We are 4 hours out. Do you want us to come in? I stared at that message for a long time. 4 hours. The Kethverdua would have the station fully controlled in 90 minutes. A frigate, 1 ship, a small one, a cargo escort class, against an 80-soldier boarding force that had already taken 4 decks. I am a thought keeper. My function is to assess correctly. I replied, yes. What I did not know, and what I should record precisely, is that Carrow's Run did not wait 4 hours. They had already been decelerating when they sent that message. They had caught the ghost bleed on the secondary band, identified it as a Vorathale distress signature, and turned toward us without waiting for authorization from anyone. By the time I replied, They were already 2 hours and 40 minutes out. Their captain, a woman named Hessler, I would learn later, short, grey-haired, with the manner of someone who had been doing this particular thing for a very long time and had grown tired of explaining it, had already briefed a boarding team. 12 people. I want to be honest about my reaction when I understood that this was the full extent of the response. 12 people. Not 12 ships. Not 1,200. 12 individual human beings, on a frigate that was not designed for combat operations, responding to an 80-strong military boarding force that had already taken 60% of our station. I have thought about that reaction many times since. I had just watched 17 Allied factions, 7 of them formally, fail to respond with anything useful. And my reaction to the one species that actually came was to doubt the numbers, to do the calculation and conclude that 12 was not enough, as if the 7 silent factions had been close to enough, as if the Duratha's assessment team was in any way comparable to a ship that had already turned around. At 0604, *Carrows Run* docked at the emergency coupling on Deck 8, the only airlock the Kethva Dua had not yet reached. I watched them come aboard on the monitor in the observation tier, because by then the Kethva Dua had decks 1 through 7 and I had nowhere else to go.
Walba humans.
I had the visual feed. I want to describe what I saw, because I have spent considerable effort since trying to find the right words, and I do not think I have fully succeeded. They moved the way that nothing else in my experience moves. Not quickly, precisely, though they were quick, but with an economy that I can only describe as the physical form of certainty. Each one of them knew exactly where they were going and exactly what they intended to do when they got there, and the knowledge was in their bodies, not just their minds. The Vorathale think. We are extraordinary thinkers. We can hold 17 variables in active consideration and resolve them in the time it takes another species to form a sentence. But thinking and moving are, for us, somewhat sequential. We think, and then we act on the thought. These 12 did not appear to experience that gap. The sergeant, I learned her name later, Marate Voss, no relation to the station name, a coincidence that I found briefly amusing in the way that one finds things amusing when one is afraid, had a short, flat face and very still eyes, and she moved through the entry corridor on Deck 8 like she was walking through her own home. Not aggressive. Not theatrical. She had a hand signal for each of the 11 behind her, and they spread through the corridor without a word. I watched the Kethva Dua boarding force on Deck 7 encounter the first 2 of them 11 minutes after they boarded. I am not going to recount what I saw in clinical detail. I am a thought keeper, and part of my function is to know which records are useful and which cause damage without elimination. I will say only this: the Kethva Dua are not a small species, and they are not a gentle one, and they have been conducting military boarding operations for 600 years. The first 2 humans they encountered on Deck 7 were a man named Dale, who carried a mechanical cutting tool in addition to his standard equipment and had apparently decided to open a sealed equipment locker mid-corridor for reasons he did not explain until later, and a woman I never got a name for who was eating something from a small container with one hand. The Kethva Dua advance unit had 8 soldiers. By the time I registered what I was watching, it was over. There are things I could say about the next 9 minutes that would make them sound extraordinary. I am choosing instead to say that they were methodical. The humans moved through Deck 7 and then Deck 6 and then Deck 5 the way that water moves through a conduit that has been correctly engineered, not because the water is special, but because someone understood the shape of the problem and built accordingly. There was no hurry. There was no drama. When Sergeant Voss found Orvale, my light pattern technician, locked in a secondary storage compartment on Deck 5, she sat with him for approximately 90 seconds and said something I couldn't hear, and he stopped trembling, and she handed him off to the combat medic, a man named Paris, calm-faced, who carried enough equipment for what turned out to be 31 injured Vorathale staff across the station, and she moved on. 11 minutes and 22 seconds from first contact to last. 80 Kethva Dua boarding soldiers. Not one human was seriously injured. I have reviewed the figure several times because my initial assessment was that I had made an error. I had not made an error. At 0741, Sergeant Voss came to the observation tier. I had remained there throughout. I am not certain why. There was nowhere safer, and the view is where I think best, and I had needed very badly to think. She knocked on the frame of the open door, which I found strange, since she had just moved through 80 armed soldiers without knocking on anything. She said the station was clear. She said her medic had stabilized everyone who needed stabilization and that 2 of our staff needed transfer to *Carrows Run* for full surgical care, and that Captain Hessler was requesting permission to stay in dock for 6 hours to complete that care before they continued on. She said the Kethvadua boarding team had been secured in Deck 3's cargo hold, restrained, and that she had filed the incident report with the nearest galactic relay, which meant that the 7 factions who had not come were now on record as having received our distress and declined. She said all of this in the same flat, even register in which she had apparently moved through the entire operation. Not proud. Not waiting for anything. The way a person reports the completion of a task that has been completed. I could not look at her. I am aware this requires explanation. Sergeant Voss had just saved Elon Voss. She and 11 other humans had done in 11 minutes what 7 allied factions with patrol routes 4 light hours away had declined to do at all. There was no logical reason for me not to look at her. There was every reason for gratitude, for formal acknowledgement, for the kind of measured words that thought keepers are trained to offer at moments of consequence. I could not do it. What I had seen was not the problem. What I had seen was competence, and competence is something the Vorathale understand and respect. What I could not resolve, what sat in me like a wrongly calculated figure that I could not correct and could not stop seeing, was the assessment. My assessment. 31 years of careful, precise, thorough work, and I had written * disproportionate response * as a liability. I had watched them move through Deck 7 for 11 seconds and known that I had measured them against the wrong scale entirely. Not because they were violent, because they were not anything so simple as violent, because they had knocked on my door. I said, eventually, that we were grateful, that I would ensure the formal record reflected the full response, that humanity's assistance would be cited to the Galactic Council. I said the words correctly. I have been trained to say words correctly. She nodded once and said they would be gone by 1400, and she left. I logged the record at 0812. I wrote the account in full, the 17 pleas, the 7 silent factions, the ghost bleed on the secondary band, the single frigate, the 12. I wrote the time index, 11 minutes and 22 seconds. I wrote the casualty figures. I wrote the Kethvadua's containment status. I wrote everything that a thoughtkeeper is supposed to write, in the order a thoughtkeeper is supposed to write it, and I wrote it correctly. Then I sat in the observation tier for a long time and looked out at the dark, which is what we do when we need to think and cannot yet find the shape of the thought. At 1347, * Carrows run * undocked. I watched them go on the exterior monitor. A small ship. A cargo escort frigate with a crew of 40 and 12 Marines and 1 medic and a grey-haired captain who had turned toward us without waiting for authorization from anyone. I have not yet found the word in any language I know for what I required them to be. What they were. What they came and were without being asked to be it, without ceremony, without a record entered anywhere that said they owed us that. I am still looking for the word. I expect I will find it eventually. We are, after all, a species that names things correctly. I just need more time.